everybody, I'm Tom Vessel.
And I'm Chris Yee.
And today we're talking about a game called Intent to Kill, which takes place, it says here in the back of the box, in the United States in the 1960s. And it's a two-player game, even though the box tells you it's 2 to 4. We're telling you straight up, it's a two-player game of cat and mouse. One person is a detective, not only cat and mouse, but deduction. One person's a detective, the other person is a murderer, and you have to figure out who the murderer is and what they've done. Let me show you. The game comes with 54 different suspects in the game, and you can see they have different pictures on them, but they have characteristics. They're going to be male or female. Their age is going to be 20, 40, or 60. They're going to have a small, medium, or large build, and then they're going to be short, medium, or tall in height. So when you take those characteristics, you have 54. You're going to pick 20 to play over the course of a game. They're going to be put out here randomly in the city. One of them, before the game starts, is randomly chosen by the murderer, or the player who's playing the murderer. That's going to be who the murderer is. So one of these 20 is a murderer. Another one is a person of interest, kind of to distract attention from the murderer. And also, there's going to be a group here that's going to support the murderer. And so you'll notice each of these different cards is one of these groups that are out there. So the murderer is going to have all that information down. They're going to write it on a piece of paper. The detective is also going to take this and keep track. And the game's going to take place over 5 or 6 turns. Now, on a murderer's turn, the first thing you're going to do is they're going to pick any 2 people on the board and intimidate them. You'll just turn them over. You can't intimidate anybody where the detective is. So the detective starts somewhere on the board. You can't intimidate, for example, the paper boy who happens to be there. But they're going to intimidate people. Then they're going to murder somebody. Whoever they murder is going to be placed up in this slot here. And then we put this here to show that that's a crime scene now. People can't go in that spot. If you murdered, like let's say in round 2, you murdered the congressman here, then this newscaster would have to move to an adjacent spot to get out of there. Now the murderer has to follow criteria corresponding to their motive. At the beginning of the game, the murderer is going to get a motive, which says all victims have to be murdered in blocks of buildings, or all victims can't be more than 2 ages, or you can't murder in the center 4 blocks of the city, or at least 3 of the victims have to be from the same social group, or they all have to be the same sex, or you cannot murder intimidated citizens, and so on and so forth. You have these different things. So you have that, you have to follow that. Now after that, the police is going to move to wherever the murder scene is, and then they have 2 movement, so they can move 2 spaces, and they have 2 actions that they can take. One of the actions is they can ask a victim who's not, or ask a person who's not been intimidated, they can ask them and say, they can ask them a question. You can say, is the murderer short? And then that person will say yes or no. Now, the murder player answers, and they have to answer truthfully unless it's the murderer or the person of interest or that group. Then they can lie. They don't have to lie. And so you write that in information, you go. There's also buildings on the board. Each of these buildings gives a special action. Like one lets you help bring people back from being intimidated. One lets you put an investigation token out on somebody. And you can use this at any time to say, can this person be murdered right now? Yes or no. And the murderer has to tell truthfully if that's the case. And the murderer can choose not to murder somebody, in which case the game will be 1 more turn. But after the 5th murder, you finish out that whole turn, and then the murderer is, then the detective has to guess who the murderer is and their motive, and they have to get both right to win. There's a few other things in the game. As the game goes by each round, both the murderer and the detective will turn over 2 of these tokens and move them around, and this way the detective can eliminate who the support group is. There's also a whole nother way you can play in the game where the murderer will get cards and the detective gets cards that you can play to help you out, but you only have a few cards over the course of the game. And then there's also, in the book, there's going to be scenarios. So if you go to the back of the book, you can pick a scenario. It will show you where the buildings are. It will show you some additional rules, and it will show you what motives that you'll use in that particular scenario. And that's how you play. So this game is an odd one because this intent to kill on here, you're not getting the deduction aspect from this, I don't think.
No, the cover's an odd cover. And in fact, the presentation of the game, as you start kind of unfolding the board, it looks really plain. It looks like not a lot of effort went into it. And then you start kind of filling it up with the cards and everything, and you realize, oh, this game does have a little bit of pop to it that I think this cover undersells a bit. But I also agree that it doesn't seem like a deduction, like that deduction game that it is.
It actually almost feels, the whole thing almost feels like a game from the 80s. And I don't mean this in a negative way, but it feels like a game that if I found a thrift store, I'm like, ooh, I'm trying to figure it out. I have my little notepad writing out who did the stuff.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you what, the production, I don't know what it is. I'm just charmed by all these 1960s illustrations, although 60s feels a little high-end. It might be 50s or 40s, some of them.
Oh, yeah. When you said 60s, that was kind of...
It says 60s here, but definitely some of them are like, now see here. You know, I mean, it really looks that way. But I love there's just incredible diversity amongst different occupations. Everyone looks different. It's just, it's colorful, it's bright, it's vibrant, which is nice because there's a lot of murder. And if you are squeamish about murder, I don't think the game is too bad about that. Yes, there's some weird things, like one of the motives is cannibalism, you know. But again, the murder just means they're gone. There's not like blood, or the game's not, you don't turn them over and there's now their destroyed corpse on the other side.
That's true. I suppose that, the most squeamish thing would be some of those motivation cards, the motive cards. And they have an interesting little thematic connection, but they are for the most part still just another logic card, a logic rule. You can't kill in the center 4 spaces of the board. You can't be right next to the last crime scene.
And if you don't like one of them, there's enough motives you can just chuck it out.
That's fair. That's true. There's also 2 game modes in here, and I was surprised they weren't too different from each other.
Yeah, they call one logic and one innovative, and when I saw that, I'm like, well, I'm playing the logic one. But really, it's just simple, and advanced is a strong word for it. It's basically just adding action cards.
Yeah, it's adding a few action cards, one for the murder team, one for the detective team, and I did like those. I could see playing the first time, just playing the more straightforward one, the logic mode, just to understand the system of the game.
I think I could play just the logic mode and be okay.
Okay, yeah. And I think there's nothing wrong with adding the little action cards either.
No, I think they're both fine. The box says 60 minutes. It might be 30.
I think so, yeah, somewhere between 30
if you're sitting there really deducing as a detective, maybe it's not a long game. There's literally 5 turns. And then you just follow the steps. There's the intimidation, then there's the murder, then there's the detective takes his turn, and there's that. It's not particularly long. It might be 6 turns, but it's not that long. Now, you asked me a question at the end of our last game if I thought I played more as the detective than as the murderer. And the answer to that is yes. I would say detective is playing 60%, maybe even a little bit more of the game.
I think so. The murderer makes a selection at the start, to intimidate some characters, kill someone, and then they sit back and take a more passive role until a few exciting moments happen. And to be clear, I'm okay with that because who I decide to kill has to try to throw you off the track, assuming I'm the murderer or the detective. I'm trying to throw you off track. I'm trying to pull you to different parts of the board, maybe, so that you have fewer...
There's also how you answer questions.
Yes, and so there's that. I'm trying to pull you towards a certain area so that you are maybe interviewing a certain class of people or job classification, because some of those people will lie on my behalf. Yeah,
that's true. The game definitely has some luck in it. I mean, the way the 20 people come out, and you might ask the right question at the very beginning as a detective, or whatever. There are things, but a lot of it is on the murderer's head. When you kill someone, you're trying to meet as many. There are depending if you're playing the one mode or the other, there's 6 or 9 motives out there that you can pick from, and you are trying to meet as many of them as you can because you're trying not to eliminate them. In fact, I would come to say, and even though I don't like the game, I think if you like Mr. Jack, there's kind of a correlation here because of Mr. Jack, you're slowly eliminating all the different people. This is that same kind of feeling. I'm slowly eliminating all the murder. The motives. But then you combine that with essentially Guess Who.
Yeah.
and trying to figure that out. It's really, it's interesting. And it's even like there's not a lot of theme, but you can add the theme, all the different people in there and the buildings and stuff.
I think the game has enough character that even though it feels fairly just kind of thematically, you're not like in it. There's enough emergent kind of moments like, ha ha ha, the government class of people are sympathetic to my cause as the murderer. So you used to have these funny little moments where they're like, oh yeah, I bought them off. You know,
Yeah.
Emergent funny moments that come during and at the end of the game. But yeah, when you first play it, it doesn't really grip you thematically. But then a few turns in, and keep in mind there's only 5 turns of the game, 5 rounds. A few turns in, you realize, okay, there's something really clever going on. You know, the other player is trying to play me really cleverly. So what do I do in response to that?
If you like back and forth deduction games, I think this is one that you would enjoy. I like a 2-player deduction game, and there's a lot of them out there. I mean, from like Watergate and things like that. Mm-hmm. This feels a little bit bigger, even though it's not. I mean, the box is bigger, and like there's a big moving city, but again, there's a lot of smaller moving parts. But I just found myself really enjoying this one. This was a surprise to me. I wasn't expecting to enjoy this one as much as we did, but I'm giving it an 8. I found it to be fun, quick, just that kind of game if there's 2 people and you both like that. It gave me a bit of a Mastermind feeling, but in Mastermind, one person is just saying yes, no, yes, right? You put the 5 or whatever the number of things are there, and you're answering. You're not doing anything. Here you're doing that same kind of thing, but now sometimes I can lie. I'm trying to push you in different ways. I will pick the combination by picking the thing. So there's a lot more agency to the murderer, which is not a sentence I don't want to say too often. But yeah, I like it a lot.
I was given a lot of leeway as a murderer. For me, I'm giving it a 7.5. I definitely enjoy it as well. And I was pleasantly surprised by it. Like I said, a few turns in, I wasn't sold on it. But then when I started to see those possibilities fading away and then the possible paths being much more narrow, it got exciting. And so it's 5 rounds. From the first round, the decisions you make as the murderer are going to have lasting effects on the next, so it doesn't outstay its welcome. There's definitely moments, if you're the murderer, you're like, oh, I should have done this differently. Next time, I'm going to come back, I'm going to try something different. I think those are important moments and feelings to have. I like being the detective, too, because you're sitting there just staring the other person down, thinking like, why did you intimidate that character? Are you throwing me off the trail, or is that actually someone you don't want me to interview to get information from? I think it does those things well. Small scope of rules, small time frame, but a good amount of game in there, 7.5 for me.
Yeah, we didn't have to look anything up for the most part, which is nice.
Yeah.
That's a good thing to a game. And they do explain the cards if you need them, and that's also a good thing.
Yep.
So there you go, folks. That's Intent to Kill. I'm Tom Vassell.
I'm Chris Yee.
And neither of us is a murderer. Probably. Hey everybody, thanks for watching another video from the Dice Tower. Hey, you want to learn more about us, communicate with us? We have a Facebook group, we have a Discord channel, lots of different ways to get involved with the Dice Tower. You can find that in our Linktree link below. So just click that, it will take you and you can communicate with us on Facebook, join our Facebook groups. There's lots of cool things that you can find and become part of the Dice Tower. Thanks so much for watching. I'm Tom Vassell.